we'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks for waiting. All right, well, my name is Micah Pierce. I'm a registered dietitian with SIH. Welcome to this rendition of the Nourish workshop series. Today we're going to be talking about plant-forward diet. There's some scientific evidence to back up the concepts we're going to talk about. As is nutrition related, I felt compelled to create a Nourish workshop based on this topic. Welcome to everybody here that's joining us here in the classroom. Additionally, we're live streaming today on Facebook. Hello, Facebook. Thank you for tuning in and joining us today. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about plant-forward diet and the reasons for it. So I'll jump right into the topic. If there's any questions for those here in the audience, please feel free to speak up. If not, that's quite all right. You don't have to feel compelled to be on camera. I'm the one that's going to get famous, not you, okay? So thank you very much for participating with us today, if you do. So let's talk about it. Let's jump right into our topic today. So we're talking about the concept of plant-forward diet. So I want to define some terms here. So let's talk about what diet means. So I went ahead to my friend Merriam-Webster, you might know, and we looked up exactly what the word diet means. So a diet, and this is the number 2 definition, is a special course of food in which one restricts oneself to either lose weight or for medical reasons. So I don't like definition number 2. That's kind of been added. So let's stick with the original number 1. This is the kinds of foods that a person eats, or a community or animal, habitually. This means is the kind of things that you do all the time. Your diet, so to speak, is how you eat on it generally as a whole, not just any one isolated time period or got to fit into that bikini or that wedding dress or whatever it is. Our diet is how we eat habitually or generally all the time. Moving forward, diet is also a verb, we might know. So I got rid of number 2. Diet is also a verb, like, hey, I'm going to diet or I'm dieting currently. This is to restrict oneself to small amounts of food or a special kind of food in order to gain some kind of stature. So that's usually to lose weight, but sometimes people have a specific indication of why they have a diet. I recommend you consult with either a doctor or, more importantly, a registered dietitian before you start making drastic changes to how you're doing, because you actually might end up doing more harm than good. So I got rid of that definition as well. Because as a dietitian, in the time I've been working, I've never once put somebody on a diet. I always affirm that if we're going to make changes, they should be permanent. They should really be things you change to your lifestyle to benefit yourself throughout the rest of your life, not just a temporary time setting. So we're going to stick with the definition number 1, the dietitian's definition. The kinds of foods a person, animal, or community eat habitually, our whole general diet. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. This is just an overview briefly. First of all, I need to define for you what plant-forward means. Many of you might have seen the postcards we sent out or seen an advertisement on Facebook for this, and you might be thinking, this guy's going to try and get us to eat a bunch of vegetables. Yes and no, but I'll define specifically what I mean by plant-forward diet. Then I'll talk about the differences between an animal food diet and a plant food diet and where we should land in the middle of that, because we do need to kind of hit a middle mark in the middle of that. And then I'm going to sell you this. This is my spiel. I'm going to sell you the benefits of plant-based food, because there are many health implications and benefits we can get from eating a diet that's rich in plant-based foods rather than rich in animal and processed-based foods. And then we'll wrap it up today with a cooking demonstration. For those of you watching Facebook Live, you might see my colorful array of cooking supplies and ingredients here. We'll just throw together a brief food demonstration to kind of tie in the nutrition lesson. So, what is meant by plant-forward? To discuss what we mean by plant-forward, I'm going to talk about what is not meant by plant-forward. So let's throw out a couple terms here. You might have heard these things like vegan and vegetarian. I hope that you didn't think that that's what we were going to try and sell today, because it certainly is not. Now, a lot of people have vegan and vegetarian lifestyles for a variety of different reasons. I've never once really affirmed that you should be vegan or vegetarian. I've never recommended or promoted that. But I do think we can take a page out of the book and learn that we can eat plant foods in higher proportions than animal-based foods. And I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But a vegan is a person who excludes any diet or product or from all animal sources. This includes things like all the meats, chicken, fish, dairy, and even products derived from animal sources like honey, silk, leather, and wool. Vegetarian is someone who excludes meat, poultry, and fish from their diet. These are often associated with some sort of faith, environmental concerns, or even ethical concerns, so forth. I don't want to eat the beef because they slaughter the cow, etc., so forth. Then there's also health and wellness considerations. Some people will adopt a vegetarian lifestyle because there is a severe restriction of saturated fat and cholesterol and a variety of other things like purines, if you know what that is. So that's some kind of a health consideration. However, the dizzying thing is there's really no unified definition of either term, vegan or vegetarian. There might be some agreement in the community, but there's no centralized definitions of these. Let me give you some examples. These are just types of vegetarians. There's what's called an ovo-vegetarian, from the Latin for eggs. So they eat vegetables and fruits and grains and only eggs. Then there's lacto-vegetarians. They eat dairy products. Then there's ovo-lacto-vegetarians. They eat both dairy and egg products. Then there's pescatarians who exclude all meat sources except fish. Then there's fruitarians, real people who only eat fruit. They don't eat vegetables because that evil broccoli is going to get you, right? I'm only joking. I apologize if you're a fruitarian. Then there's the raw vegetarian diet. There is a movement of people that believe raw foods are the way to go because cooking foods in some way distorts or harms the nutritional value of these foods. It makes me kind of dizzy, all these random terms, random ideologies and things, because really there's not a lot of scientific evidence to back up a lot of them. They're just kind of choices that people make because of certain influences, but let me provide some clarity today and talk about where we should land in our spectrum. So what is meant by plant forward? This is a unified definition. Now, a moment ago I said that there's not really a unified definition to veganism, vegetarianism, etc., because there's so many different sects and faiths and environments and things that really dictate what you should and can't eat at certain times even. But this is a modern movement, and I like that it's a movement because it's something that addresses exactly where our culture is today. It's a movement towards including more plant-based foods and fewer animal-based foods in one diet. So there's some very specific implications here. I don't want to demonize any foods. So really we're talking about plant-based diet versus plant-forward diet. Now when you saw the advertisement for today's Nourish lesson, you might have been thinking plant-based diet. Again, I don't want to encourage anybody to be vegan or vegetarian. If you do, that's a personal lifestyle choice. But I really would insist that we all could benefit from a more plant-forward diet. One where we restrict our intake of animal foods and increase our intake of plant-based foods, because there's a lot of scientific evidence to back up those recommendations. So let's do a lesson in history real quick. This is a graph. If you can't see it on Facebook, I'll kind of explain it real quickly for you. And if you can't see it in this room, I apologize. It's the only image I can find of it. But this is a graph of where Americans specifically were eating. The green portion, that's the large portion up top, is at home. These are meals cooked in the home, food sourced in and prepared at home. And then blue is away from home, and the red is fast food. This is a timeline. It starts in 1889, so we've got some pretty old data, and it went up to 2009. I think they just stopped it off because they both ended in 9, so we have a nice delineated time period. So, in early American history, we were eating, looks like above 90% of our meals at home. That green area takes up quite a bit of the space. The blue area here is foods prepared away from home. You might have eaten in a restaurant, a tavern, at friends' homes, etc., so forth. Around the 30s and 40s, fast food was invented. It didn't take a large chunk, but we started to eat a little bit outside of the home. And the blue has steadily increased, where we're eating at more social gatherings, more restaurants, more things like that, which is not inherently a bad thing, but there is some implications there. But as we crest into the 21st century, we're looking at a vast amount of fast food eating, and we're just eating away from home nearly 50% of the time we could see. We'll talk about more of that in a minute. I just want you to remember that concept. We're eating outside of the home. We're not preparing our foods in the home. We're relying on other people's skill set and ingredient sourcing to prepare our foods for us. So here's some more history, and this is staggering to me. This 12% is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Legumes, for those who don't know, are things like a few things you might think are beans, but also things like peanuts. It's just a variety of plant food. So only 12% of what the standard American diet is actually what I'm recommending to intake. Now, it doesn't have to be 100%, but it's staggering that it's only 12. 25% are the animal-based foods that I'm discussing. So red meat, fish, poultry, eggs, milk, cheese, those kind of things, dairy products, etc. Now this large portion over here, the red that we eat predominantly our food from, are oils, fats, fast food, processed, refined foods, and sweets. Now what you believe might be a lot of plant-based foods belong in this category. So for example, if you take something like a potato and you slice it up and deep fry it, to me, it's no longer a nutritional potato. It's a fried food that belongs in a somewhat refined or a processed food. There's more examples. Something like okra. Okra is a vegetable. If you batter it and fry it, you've added carbohydrate, you've added a bunch of fat to it. To me, that's no longer like a whole fruit or whole vegetable. That is a processed or refined food, or a fat-added food is another term we could use there. So this pie chart here just shows us that more than 80% of what Americans are intaking are animal-based and or processed. So when we use the term here, plant-forward, I really want to promote plant-based foods that are as close to their source in quality as we can get. So buying fresh or frozen produce at the store is what I'm talking about when I say plant-forward, not necessarily French fries that have been fried and battered, okra that's fried and battered, things that are plant-based but then have been through some kind of processing. Another point I can bring up is things like canned food. Canned food, we largely get a lot of our vegetables from cans. When I say, what kind of vegetables do you like, to many clients I see, they describe something like green beans, corn, carrots, or something like that, but they're usually from a can. And to store in a can, it has to be hermetically sealed, one, but to inhibit bacterial growth, they have to add some kind of preservative to it. Do you know what the two most preservative used in America are? Salt and sugar. Sodium and sugar, I should say. So the cans of vegetables you get in the store are laden with sodium, and they're not nearly as nutritionally viable as fresh and frozen options. So let's move forward. Here's some more. This is what I mean by animal-based food. These are classically what you might think, you might assume, but I just wanted to include a slide for clarity. So meats from, the typical farm fare we use. This sheep was kind of cute. I like her. Then we have fish, eggs, cheese, and dairy, all these sorts of things. So let's talk about what animal food implies. In animal foods, there's high amounts of saturated fat, cholesterol, and total calories. So a term I want to introduce is pro-inflammatory. Things like fat, specifically saturated fat, are very pro-inflammatory. Fat is a very dense compound, and it's packed with a lot of calories. That's why we need it as a food source, but in very sparing amounts, because fat is actually very reactionary. What I mean by that is as it goes through our digestive tract and our blood system, it's very reactionary with the tissues around it. That's what I mean by pro-inflammatory. What can happen is those inflammations can cause oxidative stress. That oxidative stress is the precursor to free radicals. And free radicals, as you might know, are the precursors to cancer. Now we have oxidative stress in our body at all times. Every one of us do every day. But if we're eating a diet large in antioxidants or rich in antioxidants, we can quell that process down. That's why it's important to eat plant-based foods, because that's where a lot of antioxidants and phytochemicals come from. But animal-based foods are very pro-inflammatory because they're void of antioxidants, as I show right here, but they're also high in these pro-inflammatory compounds like saturated fat and cholesterol. And like I said, they're also lower in fiber as well. Plant-based foods is where we get the variety of fiber that we ingest. I'll talk more about fiber in a few as well. Let's be clear. I kind of touched on this a moment ago. I don't want to demonize any food. I used to teach children, I would tell them that every food fits, but there's just different room for every kind of food. I would even say, I had a catchphrase, I said, hey kids, you got to eat the rainbow. And then I have to retract to say, well, not Skittles. I don't want you to eat candy. Because when I say rainbow, I mean like a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables, because that's where we absolutely get our vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytochemicals from. So the real key is portion control and frequency, monitoring what we eat, how much, and how often. So there's no such thing as like a bad food, as I'm saying. I myself am a registered dietitian, a master's credentialed in nutrition and dietetics, but I eat pizza. I love chicken wings. Hot wings is like one of my Achilles heels, but do I eat it every day? Absolutely not. Not even every week. I don't even eat those things every month. But you bet, a few times a year, especially like football season, we're in football season right now, it's fun to have those kind of foods every once in a while, because life is all about balance. And another word that we use for that is moderation. Like I said, my example is chicken wings. That's kind of like that's the bane of my existence sometimes. But When I eat chicken wings, I don't eat 2 dozen chicken wings. I might have 6, but I'll also eat some carrot sticks and celery and some blue cheese dressing. It goes with blue cheese. If you have ranch, I can't help you. Frequency is also, I don't eat those things very often. Like, it's not even once a week during every football game. I might eat chicken wings 2-3 times a year. But that's just to demonstrate that we really need to find the balance between the animal-based foods and the plant-based foods that we're eating. So let's move forward again. I could base this, in fact I did base this entire tutorial, this entire Nourish workshop on this slide alone. For those of you not familiar with what's an inverse relationship, you very rarely find one so perfect in science. But this is what we call an inverse relationship. The red on this chart is percentages of deaths, mortality, associated with heart disease and cancer. Heart disease and cancer are absolutely lifestyle related. Now there's other factors like workplace exposure to chemicals and carcinogens. There's smoking is certainly something, but diet is one of the main components of what I consider a lifestyle factor that really is affected by these two disease states. So the percentages of deaths by heart disease and cancer contrasted with percentage of calories from unrefined plant foods. Remember I talked about how unrefined is so important when we're eating those foods. We don't want to process them, we don't want to load them with sodium and sugar and other preservatives and things like that. So this is what I mean by inverse relationship. On this end of the chart there's the USA and Hungary. I'm a little ashamed that we're this far the other way, but notice the red, 80% of the deaths are associated with heart disease and cancer. That's a pretty large margin. Hungary's even worse. They have about 90% of their intake is that. But notice that the percentage of plants from unrefined calories is so low. And it staggers exactly inverse, as I suggested earlier. As we go up the spectrum, countries like Laos and Thailand, they eat very little processed food. They're large in these unrefined plant foods and very little what we would call heart disease or lifestyle related deaths. Sorry, I tripped my words there a little bit. But you can, I'm just staggered by this inverse relationship where as plant food and unrefined plant food goes up, you can see heart disease and cancer markedly reduced. So like I said, I based pretty much this entire workshop on this slide alone. So let's go back to America. Let's go back out west. These are what I would consider typical American fare, typical Western diet. These are examples I just chose out of thin air just because they are what we consider standard American fare, but they are very low in or void of fresh or unprocessed plant foods, and they're very high in animal foods. So there's a lot of saturated fat, cholesterol, and processed grains and things on here. So the vegetables you do see are, let's see, I see some green beans here, and green beans here, and asparagus there. So these green beans, they look nice and shiny. They're probably even cooked with some bacon fat, etc., which makes them delicious, but at the same time, this plate, because of the mashed potatoes, this high-fat gravy, these chicken fried steaks or chicken fried chicken, whatever they might be, this is very high in saturated fat and cholesterol, very little plant-based food. Same thing with this monster steak. Notice the steak is the biggest thing you see on the plate. The other thing is the potato, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's a very large portion size. Remember I talked about the amount and the frequency with which you eat these things. But then when we have a potato, we don't eat just a potato, do we? What goes on a potato? I'm hearing out in Facebook land, they're saying sour cream, butter, bacon bits, ranch dressing, all kinds of stuff goes on the baked potato. It's never just the baked potato. So we could talk about all these, but you get my point. This is what the USDA puts forward. Many of you might be familiar with the My Plate. I love the My Plate because it's a perfect example of the recommended eating patterns we should be intaking to really promote our health status. So, not every single meal we have to eat, I have to explain the plate somewhat, not every single meal we eat has to be perfectly arranged with fruit, vegetable, dairy, meat, and then a grain, whatever. Really, it's more of a pie chart that shows us the ratios of the things we should be eating every day. I like this just because it's a big colorful demonstration, but if you'll notice, the vegetables is 30% of what we're intaking, a large portion of what we're intaking. Fruits, 20%. So right off the bat, half of our plate, this whole half right here, is more than half, or if not right at half of our intake. For those in Facebook, if you can't see, I'm using a laser. If you can't see it on the screen, I apologize, but I'm just showing you the left half of that diagram there is fruits and vegetables. And then we're talking about grains here. It's recommended by the USDA that at least half of our grain intake be whole grain. What I mean by processed grain is things like white flour and then the products we make from white flour. So breads, biscuits, crescent rolls, all those things are made with a processed flour. It's okay to eat those things, but remember, the amount and frequency is what we're disturbed by. So that's why they put forth the recommendation that half of our grains should be whole grains. So lucky for us, they market a lot of whole grains in our society. So we have things like whole wheat bread, there's whole wheat pastas, whole wheat tortillas, and then there's things like grains like brown rice as opposed to white rice, and then quinoa, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. They also recommend when we're eating dairy products and we're eating meat products, we recommend go as lean as much as you can. Things like chicken, fish, and turkey are much lower in saturated fat and cholesterol than things like beef and pork. I don't want to demonize beef and pork. I think they're great in moderation. Same thing goes with dairy products. We should be eating dairy products in the lowest fat that they offer. We do have a variety of milks on the shelf, dairy milks rather. There's skim milk, there's 1%, we go all the way up to whole milk. Really, adults don't need to eat whole milk. That's an excessive source of saturated fat that we don't really need in our diet. I would recommend staggering or at least tapering down to a lower fat content of milk. And then all the other dairy products, things like cottage cheese and yogurt and other like block cheeses, I'd recommend finding reduced fat or lower fat varieties of those as well. So let's move forward and talk about that plate we just showed. It's kind of the USDA's recommendation for the configuration of foods we should be eating. As I said, we don't really have to eat with that perfect plate every single meal of the day. That's tough to do. So what I recommend is in your day, try and think about your total intake. So like say breakfast, you probably don't get a lot of vegetables for breakfast because we traditionally don't eat veggies for breakfast, but things like omelets, you could throw some green peppers, mushrooms, onions, etc. in there. But we don't always do that. So if you have a breakfast that's void of vegetables, maybe consider that for the rest of the day and be like, I need to increase my vegetable intake because I didn't have any earlier in the day. But I do have some plates that are, some beautiful photographs that are kind of the quintessential perfect meals. Even though we don't all get there, I just like the demonstration of what we can be eating. So first up, there is what looks like a chicken or tuna salad on the plate here. Notice that half of the plate is this like green salad with some tomatoes, some whole wheat toast or crackers or toast points, and then there's your protein in the form of this like chicken, and there's even some celery incorporated in there. I did like this as well because it looks like they left the fat out of it. That's a salad dressing or mayonnaise. So just so you can visually see that there's a little bit of fat added to that. So this right here shows us that this right here is plant-based food. This is a plant-based food. And then there's also some fruit out to the side as well. Here looks like a good dinner. We have chicken, a sensible portion. It's only a quarter of the plate. We have, looks like some steamed green beans or sauteed green beans with some mushrooms. Corn is our starch in this case. Let's get one thing clear, a little sidebar. Corn is not a vegetable. We classically think of corn as a vegetable because it comes in a can. But really, corn, because of its carbohydrate content, is a grain. After all, it grows like a grain. It's harvested like a grain. We make corn bread out of it. I mean, corn is a grain. It's not a vegetable. Sorry if I hurt anyone's feelings. Here's another example. This is I first saw this and thought that's a pretty big portion of meat, but at the same time, you're not going to eat all this bone and connective tissue. It's just pretty much the central portion of this. What looks like a thin cut pork chop, some cornbread, and a nice steamed vegetable medley, and I think some peaches up here as well. So we don't have to go through these extensively. I just wanted to show that if we're eating a large portion of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains as our intake, we can still take in things like scallops, pork chops, chicken, and tuna, and still have those in our diet, but in less proportions than we might be used to. So this is where I sell it to you. This is where I really promote the benefits of plant-based foods. So first and foremost, I want to make one thing very clear. We are omnivores. What that means is we're not herbivores that eat only plant matter. We're not carnivores that eat only meat. We are biologically made to eat both. We have microbiota. For those not familiar with that term, that's our gut bacteria, the bacteria that helps our digestion, they promote our immunity, and they're involved in a lot of those things. But biologically, we are set up to eat both plant matter and animal matter, but it is important to monitor the amounts of each that we're talking about. So plants are rich in many different nutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, and I mentioned phytochemicals like antioxidants and But additionally, number one on my list is fiber. Animal-based food, for all intents and purposes, is void of fiber. Fiber, let's do a little sidebar. The dietitian's definition of fiber is indigestible material that's from plant matter. It's indigestible, meaning it doesn't have any calories, it doesn't have any vitamins, minerals, any of that stuff, and it goes through our digestive tract relatively unchanged. But that's a good thing for several reasons. One, it promotes digestion. We need things to be moving along. If things are slow and lingering and hanging out, they can be very reactive in our gut. That's where that pro-inflammatory type of things from the animal-based food really has a more caustic effect. If we're eating a diet that's low in fiber, we have things that are slow in our digestion. We want them to be quicker. So that's what happens when we have a diet that's void of plant matter, or at least lower in plant matter than it should be. Let's go to one of my other favorite topics. Some people often say that eating healthy is so expensive. Has anybody ever heard that? Here's the argument I get a lot. I'm going to demonstrate really firmly that it is not. So this is the argument I get quite a bit. Why does a cheeseburger cost $1 when a salad is $5? That's a fair argument. I understand that. I understand that the places you source food, that might very well be the case. But let's look a little deeper. I don't buy it for one reason. These are actual receipts or prices from a nationwide grocery chain. So this is a 24-pack, a case of Coca-Cola. Costs a little more than $5. This is a allotment of plant-based food that costs a little bit less than $5. So a little price differentiation there, but very similar. We have, looks like a cucumber, some steamer vegetables, looks like green beans, grapes, bananas, brown rice, spaghetti. All for less than $5. There's more. This is a whole meal. This is one family's meal for 4 people. Looks like 4 burgers, 4 fries, and 4 soft drinks. This is laden with saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, sugar, the lot. And it's pretty void of nutrition value. Not a lot of fiber, not a lot of phytochemicals, antioxidants, and so forth. Down here is a very similar price. For those, if you can't see, this is $21.67 for this family of 4's fast food meal. This is $21.68, so very comparable in price. But let's read this for you real quick. 1 box of Morningstar Farms Grillers Original Meatless Burgers. These are like a soy burger patty. But there's also some 96% lean ground beef. Those first 2 right off the bat show us that, yeah, you can eat meat, and you can also eat some meat substitutes. It's about balance and moderation. There's some cashews, some strawberries, a 10-pound bag of potatoes, a gallon of orange juice, mixed vegetables, broccoli, and some dried pinto beans. All for even a couple cents cheaper, and that's actually probably, you can get 2 to 3 meals out of that for that family of 4. But what's the missing link? What is the one thing that we're not addressing here? There's a dying art of cooking at home. We're leaving our home to cook, or to rely on other people to source our food, prepare it for us, and serve it to us. The easiest method for other people, like marketers, to sell us food in is either processed, packaged, microwaved, or fast food terms. Those are all very high in saturated fat, cholesterol, animal-based food, and processed food. That's really the exact reason why I'm recommending the exact stuff I'm recommending against. So the missing link is us being able to source food ourselves and cook at home. So back to this list we're talking about. Is it cost effective to eat fruits and vegetables? Absolutely it is. It's much cheaper, as I just demonstrated, to eat things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, and you can buy some animal products in there as well in moderation. I'm actually saving you money if you eat in the manner I'm recommending. So the reduced risk of several health disparities is also one of the main points to promote a plant-based diet. Things like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, even Alzheimer's disease, and several types of cancer are all directly related or correlated through scientific research to our lifestyle factors. Most importantly, in those lifestyle factors are diet. Now, as I said earlier, some environmental exposure to carcinogens and tobacco use is definitely involved, but one of the main things that we can affect in our daily life is our diet intake. Not our temporary diet, but remember our habitual intake of things over our lifespan. So here, just let me give an example. But Micah, I'm switching to more plant-based foods. Won't I miss out on protein if I switch from beef to black beans? Well, got a graphic for you right here. Things like protein are often considered when we're switching to a plant-based diet. And yeah, it's definitely possible to be deficient in protein, especially if you react in a very extreme manner, like the folks that went to direct veganism or vegetarianism. But I say we can find a balance. So if you eat things like, let's say, black beans versus beef, this is per 100 grams of beef or black beans, equal weights. There's 14 grams of protein per 100 grams of beef, and there's 21 to black beans. So black beans the clear winner in protein content, which just indicates there are plant sources of protein. And black beans is going to win all the way down. Spoiler alert, I'll just go through them real briefly with you. Fat, black beans are virtually void of fat. Now we can certainly cook them with like pork or something in the stewing pot or whatever we're going to do with our black beans, but in their natural form they're almost void of fat, whereas beef is very high in saturated fat, as we know. And saturated fat is one thing, but it's also void in fiber on the beef side, where black beans, and all beans rather, are a high source of fiber. Sodium, it wins again, calcium, and iron as well. Often we promote people with anemia to eat meats and things like that, when really there's a lot of sources of iron in our diets that are non-meat related. So things like black beans, spinach, certain nuts are all high in iron as well. This is a diagram from actually a vegan website, and I just pulled it up just because they have some excellent resources. But these are plant sources of protein. Things like soy or edamame you might be aware of or familiar with. Things like quinoa, red beans, chickpeas. Notice that there are a lot of beans, nuts, seeds, but then also some grains. And even broccoli has a little bit of protein in it. But let's draw our attention to one specific. There's quinoa. Has anybody ever had quinoa? You might have to pronounce it quinoa. It's not. It's quinoa. It's a South American grain. I call it like South America's rice's cousin, because it's very similar to rice. It's a small pearl grain that's spherical instead of elongated like a rice grain. It has a wonderful rich aroma and flavor. It cooks up just like rice, and it has a very high protein content. Let's talk about the nutritional content of it. This is quinoa compared to white rice. 40% fewer calories, this is per serving, and 9 grams less carbohydrate per serving. So if you're concerned with counting your carbohydrates like our diabetic population, that's actually quite a big winner. For another reason, there's 2.5 more grams of fiber. Fiber helps our digestive processes, as I described earlier, but fiber also helps us regulate our intake of glucose. When I say intake of glucose, the foods we eat is converted into blood sugar, but if we eat straight sugars or starches, it gets converted directly into glucose, into our blood system. But if we have a diet high in fiber, we'll still absorb those sugars or starches, but it actually takes a little bit longer, so we get a more tapered and sustained source of that glucose instead of just a large spike in blood glucose, which is actually what we really want to avoid. And it has twice the protein content of rice as well. So, we'll go ahead and pause for just a second while I set a few things up, but I wanted to show you how we can make quinoa into a very edible, very delicious and nutritious meal, and incorporate some other vegetables as well. So I'll be 1 second. All right, this is the moment where I switch from dietitian Micah to chef Micah. When I put the apron on, it's like a wardrobe change, I guess. And we're going to throw together a recipe for a Mediterranean quinoa salad. All right. So I'm going to step over to our Facebook friends right now, and I'm going to tilt the camera a little bit more in this direction so they can kind of see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I had a helper, but they're not here. Beautiful. All right, so I'm literally going to roll up my sleeves and we're going to get to work here. So as I said, quinoa it's from the Andes region, but it's a South American grain. It's high in fiber, it's rich in protein. It looks and it tastes a little like rice, but it's also its own unique character. So let's go ahead and just follow a recipe and throw this thing together. For those here in the classroom, I've given a recipe card. It actually has this exact slide on it, so you can try and reproduce this at home. Today we're not going to follow this recipe exactly, just because I'm going to leave out the olives, just because some people don't like don't need the intense salt of olives, or they don't like pickled foods that much. But we'll go ahead and follow pretty close to what it is there. So quinoa, like I said, it cooks up just like rice at home. The recipe I have for this quinoa was just package instructions say 2 cups of water, 1 cup of quinoa. So I went ahead and boiled up a couple batches of that quinoa. Actually, what I'll do is, for those on Facebook, I'll show you what it looks like. I'll kind of come right to the camera. I just bought some South American quinoa. Here is, if you can see that, just little nice pearls of a grain, very much like rice. And here, I'll pass this around to those here in the class as well. So as I can't cook here in our studio, they were afraid I'll burn down the place. I went ahead and cooked up a batch of quinoa last night. And it steams just like rice, very similar. You just turn on the water over the stove, get it cooked till it's soft and tender, and it comes out again just like a rice. It's just like a very, very tender grain. So what I'm going to do is, I made a double portion, so I'm just going to cut this in half and put it in our mixing bowl here. And then we're talking about plant-based foods today, so I'm going to go ahead and incorporate a bunch of other vegetative matter. So we have on the docket today some, looks like onion, bell pepper, cucumber. We're skipping olives and cherry tomatoes. So I'll go ahead and jump right into the first one on the list, is the red onion. So as I mentioned earlier, I think a dying art in our society is cooking at home. People are reliant on other people to prepare and source their foods. So I always recommend learning a little bit of skill at home in order to kind of be able to do this on your own. So the most dangerous tool in the kitchen is a dull knife. A sharp knife is actually much safer, because if a knife is dull, you're going to work hard to push through something and actually make mistakes that way. When it's sharp, you're going to get that job done the way it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and break down an onion. Onion is concentric spheres, so what I like to do is just take it in half, and I use what I call the claw method, where you never expose your knife to the bottom of the blade. You're kind of clawing it up like this, to where your knuckles are facing the blade, and you can chop and move across things without really interfering with your fingers. So we'll just take that and put it straight down on the table, cut that onion in half. So I'm just going to use a little bit less than half of the onion, because this is a red onion and it's very powerful in flavor. So I'll take the tails off as well. One thing I like about onions is, like I mentioned, they are concentric spheres. So there's just several layers to them that kind of go to the middle. So what I can do is, to get a bunch of diced onion in one quick motion, I'll show you real quick here. You kind of come through the top of the onion, don't go all the way through it. Notice I didn't go all the way through the onion. And then I'm going to do that a couple more times, a little bit lower. And then I'm going to strike it down, again without breaking it completely. So this backside of the onion is still intact, but I can just kind of come through and make a bunch of slits. So then when I come through on the third phase, it comes out as a nice dice. I'm actually only going to use about that much, because this is it's a very potent onion. I'm getting the vapors off into my eyes right now. So we'll go ahead and throw that into our mix, into our quinoa. Next up is a green bell pepper. I love green bell peppers. Nice rich flavor. The darker the green bell pepper, the more antioxidants that are in it. Additionally, I don't know, this is just a fun fact. If you have a green pepper with 4 segments down bottom, it's a female. The green peppers that only have 3 are a male. So what you can do with green pepper is, I like to just take it right down the side, like right down an angle. And then you can do that again. Then what I like to do is take out that little white pith portion in the middle. very gentle. So then you have these nice pepper flats. What I like to do then is, with our claw method still, we're putting our knuckles on the blade. We're not exposing our fingers to the blade. Just come through and make little, what we call julienne. They're just little finger or match cut sticks of green pepper. So you have these nice little matchsticks of green pepper. So then I line all the matchsticks up end to end, and you can do a fine dice. Notice that my blade never leaves the surface when I'm doing this style cut. The tip is always touching, and then I'm just reapplying it to the top and sliding it through. And still with my claw finger, so I don't actually get my finger under that blade. I also like a chef's knife like this because of the wide blade, and you can use it as a scooping tool as well. Bring it right up, throw that into our quinoa as well. So now we're going to do some cucumbers. Now I've washed all my produce. It's very important to wash it before you start cutting it, even if you're not going to use the outside peel, just because when you cut that flesh, you could expose the interior to bacteria that's on it. So it's always important to wash all your produce thoroughly, no matter where you bought it. If it's your favorite grocery store or market, it doesn't matter. It can still have bacteria on it. So I like to use a Y peeler. That old peeler that you use by the hand and put to the side, it doesn't really work for me ergonomically. I kind of like this Y peeler as well. So we can come across the cucumber. Backwards, that's embarrassing. It's almost too clean. It doesn't even want to come away from the cucumber. It's so perfect. You can leave skin on if you like. I just, in this salad preparation, I like it without the skin. We're only going to need a little bit less than half of that cucumber, honestly. So what I do is I'll cut the cucumber in half, and then I'll take out the seed portion. Just so we get the nice cucumber flesh and has that cucumber crunch into our salad. So what I'll do also is come through these segments a few times just so we have like little strips. Similar to like the strips we're going to do with the green pepper and the onion, just so that I can cut little bite-sized pieces. Because again, if we have a tiny quinoa and fine diced other vegetables, we don't want large chunks of cucumber to contrast. So we have some medium diced cucumbers. Let's go ahead and incorporate that. And now we have cherry tomatoes. These have also been washed. These are actually grape tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, or you can actually buy whole Roma tomatoes or beefsteak tomatoes and just cut them into a fine dice as well. But I like these little cherry tomatoes because they are an appropriate size once we've cut them. I'll go ahead and cut these in quarters, just so they're small enough to match the other sizes of veggies in our quinoa salad. So you see what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of plant food we're eating, but there's also a theme here. We're going with like a Mediterranean theme, and it's also adding a lot of flavor. So one of the rules in culinary arts, if you've ever been to culinary school or watched any cooking shows, is fat is flavor. But I don't really agree with that. I think fat helps support flavor. To me, flavor really comes out of vegetables. Have you ever made chicken noodle soup and not had like carrot, onion, and celery in it? It's boring. Alright, that's good for now. Alright, so into our quinoa we have a bunch of veggies. We have red onion, green pepper, cucumber, and some grape tomatoes that have been quartered. So now we need a dressing. We need something to combine all this together. So I'm going to clean up my little workstation here slightly, and we'll get to work on a dressing. So, to stick with our Mediterranean theme, I've used an extra virgin olive oil. I have some oregano and some lemon juice. Now, I'm going to use some fresh lemon juice just because I think it tastes brighter. I don't really like the little bottles that you squeeze the lemon juice out of. And it's not that hard, and it's very affordable just to keep lemons and limes and other citrus fruit on hand in your home. This recipe on the screen also calls for a balsamic vinegar. I left that out today just because some people might not like that. It's a pretty intense flavor. I love vinegars myself, but The lemon, if we use enough, will provide enough acidity to balance this salad out. So let's go ahead and start. What I like to do with lemons is give it a roly-poly a little bit and press it against the surface, because you're going to break some of the cell walls in there and expose some of that juice. So then we'll just go ahead and cut it right in half. And then I don't want any seeds in my dressing, so I'm going to put it through a little mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and just squeeze that lemon juice right through this mesh. Nope, got the seeds in there, yep. More. I wish that on Facebook you could smell the lemon when you cut it, because it's like so bright and fresh. When you're eating these kind of foods, it's really nice to experience all the ingredients individually, and then you kind of get the symphony when they're all combined. For those on Facebook, you can't see, my audience right now is wafting the smell of lemon juice into their face. You're welcome, by the way. Okay, so we're also going to use some olive oil. I like the extra virgin variety just because it's got a robust flavor. I'm going to use about equal portions of lemon juice and olive oil. So then we're going to use some fresh herbs. I like these herbs fresh. You can use dried thyme if that's what you have, or I'm sorry, oregano if that's what you have at home. But the fresher the herbs you get, the more like powerful flavors you're going to get. So oregano in its raw form, it comes on these stalks, so I would recommend taking it off those stalks. You can do that really easily just by pulling it up, pulling right along the spine of it. You can use as much or as little as you like. I'd recommend starting with a little bit and then slowly increasing just based on the intensity of flavor you want. So I'm going to use about that much. That's only maybe a teaspoon, tablespoon of that herb. But what I like to do is just pinch it all together, press it into a little small compressed pile. And then you take that knife using the same claw method where you have your fingers not exposed to the blade and come across it really, really finely. Just making small adjustments and using your little fingers to scoot it into the blade's chopping motion. So then at this point, I got the blade down on the cutting board and my hand on top to where there's no exposure at all. And I'm just going to keep going over and over, get it in like a semicircle motion until we have the perfect chop of herb we want. I think that's good. I'm going to put that right into our dressing. Okay. Last and not least, notice I haven't used any salt in this recipe. These vegetables have a wonderful flavor and they can be brought out by a little bit of salt. And I don't want to add a bunch of like fistfuls of like granulated salt, because we're going to add salt with some feta cheese to stick with our Mediterranean theme. This is kind of a Greek rendition, and if you use the Kalamata olives that are on the recipe card, or any old olive is fine. If you have some old green olives or black olives, whatever you prefer at home, that's fine as well. But I like the purple or Kalamata olives. They have a wonderful flavor that kind of lends themselves really nicely to this recipe. So, but the feta does bring the salt to the party that we need. Feta cheese is a very nice, rich cheese, and it is an animal-based food, but we're only using it in a very sparing amount just to add flavor to the other vegetables. So I'm just going to incorporate some right here into the dressing, and I'm just going to very, very briefly whisk all that together. Big cubes get stuck in the thing. Okay. I'm using the whisk kind of as a masher to break up some of the little clusters of the feta cheese. All right. The janitors will thank me later when they clean the feta cheese off the floor. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and bring that rest to the party. I'm going to go ahead and incorporate our dressing that we've made fresh into our vegetable and quinoa mixture into this mixing bowl. And then we're simply just going to fold it over a few times to incorporate all the ingredients. Now, ideally, what we would do is throw this in the refrigerator for I'd say an hour, or even overnight if you have that kind of time. Or you can serve it right away, but if you really let all the flavors marry by storing it in a cold box overnight, it really kind of gives it a nice texture and flavor overnight. Okay, so there's the finished product. It's a very protein-rich, plant-based food kind of recipe. Has lots of vegetables, and maybe introducing you to a new grain, quinoa. So for those of us here at the at this studio, we're going to offer some samples. Sorry if you couldn't make it today, but thanks for joining us on the Facebook stream. If you're watching this video later on, hopefully you can join us for a future episode. But I'm going to be passing these samples around, so I'm going to go ahead and end the Facebook live feed. If you have any questions, you can come to the Cancer Institute or call my office. It's 618-985-3333. Then call my extension at 69295. We do have one more workshop scheduled in December, and I don't have the date at the top of my head, but you can call for that information or look it up on the Cancer Institute's Facebook page. But we'd love to have you at any of our upcoming workshops. They are free to all. You don't have to have a diagnosis. You can just be a friend, a family member, a caregiver, or just someone who works in the medical community who's curious to learn about these things. But all are welcome, the more the merrier. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to take a minute, I'm going to walk around, I'm going to end the Facebook live feed, but thank you for all who joined us here in the studio, and thank you for signing in on Facebook. Thank you.